I didn't become a park ranger because I loved nature. I became one because I was good at being alone. After 8 years in the army and another 2 working private security in Atlanta, the mountains of western North Carolina seemed like the closest thing I could find to silence. By the fall of 2024, I was assigned to a remote Appalachian district where most calls involved injured hikers, illegal camps, abandoned vehicles, and the occasional missing person. The job was modern enough. Body cameras, GPS trackers, satellite radios, trail cameras mounted along problem areas. But once you got beyond the last paved road, all that technology became less comforting than people think. A GPS can show exactly where you are. It can't tell you why something is standing 20 yards away in the trees and refusing to move. The call came through at 11:18 p.m. on a Thursday in November. Dispatch told me a woman had used the emergency SOS feature on her phone, somewhere near an old section of mountain trail locals called the Cutoff. Her signal appeared for 11 seconds, disappeared, then returned almost 2 miles farther up the mountain without following any road or trail. Her name was Madison Price, 27, from Charlotte. She had been hiking with her fiancé, Eric. Eric was missing. Madison's final text message to 911 was only 4 words. "He is not Eric." I remember staring at that message on the screen while dispatch tried calling her again. No answer. Then another message arrived from her phone. "Please don't send anyone." That was followed almost immediately by a second message. "Please hurry." I drove up alone because the nearest backup unit was 40 minutes away. My body camera was recording, my GPS was transmitting, and dispatch could see my location on their map. At least that was supposed to be the case. When I reached mile marker 19, Madison's SUV was sitting sideways across a dirt pull-off with both front doors open. Her purse was on the driver's seat. Eric's phone was lying on the ground beside the passenger door, screen cracked, but still lit. I picked it up and saw an audio recording playing through the speaker. At first, there was only wind. Then I heard Madison crying. She kept saying, "Stop pretending. Stop pretending you don't know." A man's voice answered her. "Madison, it's me." Then Madison screamed. The recording ended. I called dispatch and told them I was entering the trail. They asked me to repeat myself. I thought the radio was malfunctioning because all I could hear was static. Then, through the static, I heard my own voice say, "I'm entering the trail now." The transmission had come 3 seconds before I actually spoke the words. I stopped walking. My flashlight was pointed down the trail, and that's when I saw a phone screen glowing on the ground about 50 feet ahead. It belonged to Madison. I recognized the case from the missing person report. I bent down to pick it up, and the phone unlocked automatically. There was one video open. It had been recorded less than 20 minutes earlier. Madison was filming herself. Her face was filthy. Her hair was wet, and behind her I could see Eric standing on the trail. Madison whispered. "He came back an hour after he disappeared." The camera shook. She turned it toward Eric. He was standing completely still. "Eric?" she asked. The man lifted his head. Even through the grainy phone footage, I could see something was wrong with his face. Not monstrous, not supernatural looking, just wrong. His expression didn't change when she spoke. He stared directly into the camera and smiled a little too slowly. Then Madison whispered something I couldn't understand, and the video ended. A branch snapped behind me. I spun around with my hand on my sidearm. Nothing. When I turned back, the phone was gone from the ground. I thought I had dropped it, but then I heard it ringing somewhere deeper in the forest. I followed the sound for maybe 2 minutes before realizing I was no longer on the trail. The trees were so thick that my flashlight couldn't reach more than a few yards ahead. I checked my GPS. The screen showed my position at the trailhead. According to the device, I had never left the road. Then dispatch came through my radio and asked why I had stopped moving. I told them I was at least half a mile into the woods. There was a long pause. Then the dispatcher said very quietly, "Don't move." I asked why. She didn't answer. Instead, she transferred me to my supervisor. His first words were, "Who is standing behind you?" I didn't turn around. I could hear breathing. Slow, wet breathing. Close enough that I could hear saliva moving in someone's mouth. My supervisor kept shouting through the radio, telling me to run, but I couldn't move. Then a woman's voice spoke directly behind me. "Don't turn around. That's what it wants. Madison." I turned anyway. There was no one there, but hanging from a branch above me was my body camera. I reached for it and immediately looked down at my chest. My body camera was still attached to my uniform. The one hanging from the branch was another identical camera. Same model. Same department label. My name was scratched into the side. I pressed the playback button. The footage began with me walking into the forest. Except the date stamp said it had been recorded tomorrow night. I watched myself moving through the trees, flashlight shaking. Then I heard myself talking to someone off camera. "Madison, get behind me!" A woman screamed. I ran toward the sound. The camera swung wildly, and for 1 second I saw something standing on the trail. It looked like me. Same uniform, same flashlight, same face. Then the footage ended with a gunshot. I dropped the camera. That's when my real radio transmitted one final message from dispatch. "Ranger, we have your location now," I said. "Good, send backup." She replied, "No, listen carefully. Your GPS has been showing you at mile marker 19 for 37 minutes. I looked through the trees toward the road. I could still see it. My truck was parked exactly where I had left it. Then she continued, "But your body camera feed shows someone else walking behind you." I slowly raised my flashlight. 20 feet away, between the trees, a man in a ranger uniform was standing completely still. His face was hidden in darkness. His body camera was blinking red. Recording. He lifted one hand and placed a finger over his lips. Then my radio went dead. I fired one shot into the air and ran toward the road. When I reached my truck, Madison was sitting in the passenger seat. I nearly crashed into the door. Her hands were zip-tied behind her back, but there was no sign of who had tied them. She looked at me and said, "That's not your truck." I looked through the windshield. My equipment was inside. My rifle, my jacket, my paperwork, everything exactly where I had left it. But the digital clock on the dashboard showed 2:46 a.m. I had entered the forest at 11:18. I had lost more than 3 hours. Madison began crying. "Where's Eric?" I asked her. She stared at me for a long time before answering. "Eric came out of the woods twice." I asked what she meant. She said the first Eric had returned injured and terrified. The second one had appeared 10 minutes later. The two of them had stood on the trail looking at each other. Neither one moved. Then Madison ran. I drove her out of there as fast as I could. State police met us at the bottom of the mountain. They searched the entire area before sunrise. They found Eric's body nearly a mile from the trail. He had been dead for at least 12 hours. Madison was taken to the hospital. Her phone was recovered the next morning. The strange video was still there, but the man standing behind her wasn't Eric. It was me. Same uniform. Same name tag. Same face. The problem was, according to my official duty log, I had never been assigned to that park before 2024. The video had been recorded in 2019. I requested a transfer 3 weeks later. Before I left, an investigator showed me one final piece of evidence. The trail cameras near mile marker 19 had captured my patrol vehicle arriving that night. They showed me getting out at 11:18 p.m. and walking into the woods. Then, at 11:21, the camera recorded me walking out again. I returned to my truck and stood beside the driver's door for almost 3 hours without moving. At 2:46 a.m., I finally got into the vehicle and drove away. The camera never showed Madison entering the truck. It never showed anyone else leaving the woods. And the man who walked back out at 11:21 was wearing my uniform. He had my face. But when the camera zoomed in, his mouth was smiling before he reached the road. Story 2. The last thing Ranger Daniel Holt said to me before disappearing was, "If the trail camera sends you a picture of me, don't come looking for me." I thought he was trying to scare me. We had worked together for 6 years in a remote Appalachian park in eastern Tennessee, and Daniel was known for his dry sense of humor. At 3:07 in the morning, when my phone woke me with an automated alert from camera 47 on Raven Ridge, I almost ignored it. The camera had been installed near a closed section of trail after several hikers reported hearing screams coming from the ravine. I opened the image, expecting a deer. Instead, Daniel was standing directly in front of the camera. He was staring into the lens. His face was covered in blood. Behind him was complete darkness. The strange part was that Daniel had been sitting beside me at the ranger station less than an hour earlier. I called his phone. It rang once. Then I heard it ringing somewhere inside the building. I walked down the hallway and found Daniel's phone lying on his desk. His truck was still in the parking lot. His coat was hanging over his chair. The security camera footage showed him leaving the station at 2:41 a.m., walking alone toward the forest behind the building. Nobody saw him leave. Nobody heard the door open. He simply disappeared from the camera's view. I called my supervisor and requested a search team, but Raven Ridge was almost an hour away by vehicle, and the road leading up there was washed out from heavy rain. By the time I reached the trailhead, it was 4:32 a.m. I was alone. My phone had no signal. My GPS worked for the first 10 minutes, then suddenly showed me standing in the middle of a lake. I switched on my body camera and started walking. Raven Ridge was one of those old Appalachian trails that looked normal during the day but felt wrong after midnight. The trees grew so close together that the darkness seemed solid between them. Every few minutes I found something strange on the ground: a park service glove, an empty water bottle, a flashlight. Then I found Daniel's ranger badge. It was nailed to a tree. Under it, carved into the bark, were the words, "You already found him." I called Daniel's name. Nothing answered. Then my radio clicked. "Don't use your light." It was Daniel's voice. I froze. "Where are you?" I asked. "Turn your light off." His voice sounded calm, but I could hear him breathing hard. "Daniel, tell me where you are." There was a long silence. Then he whispered, "I'm behind you." I spun around. Nothing. My flashlight swept across the trees, and for half a second it caught the reflection of 2 eyes. Human eyes. Then they disappeared. I ran toward the location of camera 47. When I arrived, the camera was still attached to the tree, but someone had turned it around. It was facing directly down the trail. I checked the memory card. Hundreds of photos had been taken that night. The first showed Daniel walking into frame. The next showed him looking behind himself. The next showed him running. Then, suddenly, there were 2 Daniels in the photograph. One was running toward the camera. The other was standing in the trees behind him. I kept scrolling. In the next image, the standing Daniel was closer. In the next, closer again. The running Daniel had disappeared. Then the photographs changed. I was in them. I looked at the timestamps. The first picture of me had been taken at 3:12 a.m., almost 80 minutes before I arrived at the trailhead. In the photo, I was standing beside camera 47. Behind me was someone wearing my uniform. I dropped the camera and heard footsteps coming up the trail. Slow. Heavy. I shouted, "Identify yourself!" Daniel stepped out from behind a tree. He looked alive, but something about him was wrong. His uniform was clean. His face had no blood on it. He smiled when he saw me. "Took you long enough," he said. I asked him where he had been. He looked confused. "I've been looking for you." I told him he was the one missing. Daniel's smile disappeared. "No," he said. "You went missing 3 hours ago." I backed away. Then another voice came from the darkness behind him. "Don't listen to him." Daniel turned toward the sound. I did too. Another Daniel was standing 50 feet down the trail. This one was covered in blood. His uniform was torn open across the chest. He looked at me and shouted, "That's not me!" The clean Daniel started laughing. Not loudly, just a low, exhausted laugh, like someone had finally heard a joke he had been waiting years to tell. The bloody Daniel raised his service weapon. The clean Daniel raised his hands. I couldn't tell which one was real. Then both of them looked at me at the exact same time. The bloody one said, "Shoot him." The clean one said, "Shoot him." I ran. I didn't care which one was real anymore. I ran until I reached a wooden bridge crossing a narrow ravine. Halfway across, my body camera began playing audio by itself. I heard my own voice screaming, then Daniel's voice, then something I had never heard before, a recording of myself begging someone to let me go. I ripped the camera from my chest and threw it into the ravine. The second it hit the water, every sound in the forest stopped. No wind, no rain, no footsteps. I looked back toward the trail. Both Daniels were gone. I crossed the bridge and saw headlights through the trees. My truck was parked at the trailhead. I got inside and locked the doors. Then I saw someone sitting in the passenger seat. Daniel. The bloody one. He was breathing heavily. "Drive," he whispered. I started the engine. As we pulled away, I looked at him and asked, "Are you really Daniel?" He didn't answer. We drove in silence for several minutes before he spoke. "Did you leave the camera in the ravine?" I said yes. He slowly turned his head toward me. "Then why is it recording us?" I looked down at the dashboard. My phone was connected to the truck system. A new image had appeared on the screen. It was a trail camera photo. It showed my truck driving down the mountain road. I was behind the wheel. Daniel was sitting beside me. But there was a third person in the back seat, pressed against the middle of the darkness. I slammed on the brakes and turned around. The back seat was empty. When I faced forward again, Daniel was gone. The passenger door was closed. The seat was dry. There were no footprints outside in the mud. I drove straight to the ranger station and called for help. Search teams went back to Raven Ridge at sunrise. They found camera 47 still on the tree. My body camera was lying underneath it, perfectly dry, even though I had thrown it into the ravine. Daniel's badge was still nailed to the tree, but there were now 2 badges. One belonged to Daniel Holt. The other belonged to me. Daniel was officially declared missing 6 months later. His body was never found. I transferred out of the park the following spring. I thought that was the end of it. Then, 2 years later, I received an automated notification on my new phone. It came from camera 47. The camera had been disconnected from the park system after Daniel disappeared, but somehow it had taken a new photograph. The picture showed Daniel standing on Raven Ridge. He was older. His beard was grey. His face was thin. He was staring directly into the camera. Under the image was a timestamp from that same night. Then my phone received a second photograph. This time, Daniel was gone. I was standing in front of the camera instead. Behind me, something wearing my old ranger uniform was walking out of the trees. Story 3. My name is Ransom Vale, and for 7 years I worked as a backcountry ranger in a protected stretch of the Appalachian Mountains, where cell service disappeared less than 3 miles beyond the last paved road. Most people imagine a ranger's job as rescuing hikers and warning tourists about bears, but by 2025, a large part of our work involved technology: GPS beacons, emergency satellite messages, trail cameras, drone searches, and location data pulled from phones. That's why the call I received on a freezing night in January bothered me so much. The emergency signal came from a smartphone that had been reported destroyed 14 months earlier. The phone belonged to a missing hiker named Kestrel Boone, a 34-year-old software designer from Richmond who vanished during a solo hike near Coldwater Gap. Search teams had spent 11 days looking for her. Drones flew the ridges. Dogs searched the creeks. Her family hired private teams. Nothing was ever found. Not a backpack, not clothing, not even a single footprint. Then, at 12:41 a.m., her phone suddenly connected to the emergency network and transmitted one message. I made it out, but don't come down here. I was the closest ranger. I arrived at the coordinates just after 1:30. There was no trail there. Just a steep slope covered in dead leaves and ice, with an old maintenance road cutting across the mountain below. Dispatch kept asking me to confirm the location, but the coordinates were shifting every few seconds. 20 yards east, 40 yards west. Then suddenly, almost a mile downhill, it was moving. I switched on my body camera and started descending. Halfway down, I found a modern hiking backpack hanging from a tree branch. It was frozen solid. A pink emergency whistle was clipped to the strap. Inside, everything was dry. A power bank, food packets, a satellite communicator, and a wallet containing Kestrel's driver's license. The expiration date said 2029. I checked the satellite communicator. It showed only one unsent message, typed at 12:37 that night. There are people here who know my name. Then I heard a notification sound from somewhere beneath the ground, a phone alert. I followed it to a narrow crack between 2 boulders. Warm air was coming out of it. I crawled inside and found an old drainage tunnel built decades earlier for a mining operation. The tunnel wasn't on any current park map. I called dispatch and told them what I had found. The dispatcher went silent for almost 10 seconds. Then she asked, "Ransom, who are you talking to?" I thought she was joking. "You." She said, "No. Your radio transmission is coming from inside the tunnel." I looked at the radio in my hand. It was turned off. The red power light wasn't on. Then, from deeper inside the tunnel, I heard my own voice say, "I'm coming down now." I switched my flashlight toward the darkness and saw a fresh set of muddy boot prints leading away from me. Same tread pattern as my boots. Same size. I followed them because I had already made the mistake of thinking fear was a good reason to leave someone behind. The tunnel went farther into the mountain than it should have. My GPS said I was moving northeast, but my compass kept pointing straight down. Every few minutes, I found evidence that someone had been living inside. Canned food with recent expiration dates, disposable phone chargers, water filters, even a small solar-powered lantern. None of it was old. Then I reached a metal door standing open at the end of the tunnel. Behind it was a room filled with phones, hundreds of them, Old flip phones, cracked smartphones, brand new devices. Every phone had a handwritten name taped to its back. Missing hikers, missing hunters, missing campers. Some names I recognized from old park reports, others I didn't. Kestrel Boone's phone was lying on a table in the center of the room. It began ringing the second I stepped inside. I answered it. A woman whispered, "Ransom. Don't let them see you alone." I asked if she was Kestrel. She began crying. "I don't know anymore." Before I could say anything else, every phone in the room lit up at once. Hundreds of screens glowing in the darkness. Then they all started receiving calls. I could hear voices through the speakers. People asking for help. Parents calling their children. Rangers calling search teams. Dispatchers giving coordinates. Then one phone began playing a live video feed. I picked it up. The video showed me standing in the room. I was watching myself from the opposite corner, but the camera was clearly behind me. Slowly, I turned around. There was nothing there. On the screen, however, someone was standing inches behind my back. I dropped the phone. The room went dark. I heard a woman's voice whisper my name from the far side of the room. "Ransom Vale." Then another voice repeated it. Then another. Soon, dozens of voices were saying my name from different corners of the darkness. I ran toward the tunnel. My flashlight came back on, and I saw Kestrel standing in front of me. She looked exactly like the photograph from her missing person file, except her hair was grey, and her face was deeply lined, as if 14 years had passed instead of 14 months. She grabbed my jacket and said, "You need to leave before the morning signal starts." I asked her what that meant. She looked terrified. "Every morning, they send someone back." Behind us, a loud tone began echoing through the tunnel, the same emergency alert sound used on our Ranger radios. Kestrel released me. Her expression changed instantly. She stepped backward into the darkness. "Go," she whispered. "If you see me outside, don't stop." I ran. I don't remember climbing out of the tunnel. The next thing I knew, I was lying beside my patrol vehicle at 6:12 a.m. My supervisor was standing over me with two deputies. They said they had been searching for me all night. I told them about Kestrel, about the tunnel, about the phones. We went back immediately. The crack between the boulders was gone. Solid rock. No tunnel. No warm air. Nothing. They reviewed my body camera footage at headquarters. For the first hour, the footage was normal. Then the screen went black. But the audio continued. They could hear me walking, breathing, talking to someone. For nearly 4 hours, I was speaking with different people. The investigators could identify 23 voices. Everyone belonged to a person officially listed as missing in the Appalachian region. At 5:58 a.m., there was one final voice. Mine. The other, Ransom, said, "He's back. Close the door." Then the recording ended. Kestrel Boone's phone has never transmitted another signal. But sometimes, when I'm working alone in the mountains, my emergency phone vibrates at exactly 12:41 a.m. The screen never shows a number, only a location. Coldwater Gap. And beneath the coordinates is the same message every time. I made it out. You didn't. Story 4. I had been working as a backcountry ranger in the Appalachian Mountains for almost 11 years when I learned that the most dangerous thing you can encounter in the woods isn't always an animal, a storm, or another person. Sometimes it's a place that seems to remember you. This happened in October 2025, during the busiest part of the fall season, when the mountains were packed with tourists during the day and became almost completely empty after dark. My district covered several miles of steep forest, abandoned logging roads, old fire towers, and trails that had been closed for years but were still occasionally used by hunters and experienced hikers. One of those trails was called Hollow Creek Trail. It was only 6 miles long, but we had received an unusual number of complaints about it. Hikers reported hearing footsteps behind them when nobody was there. Some claimed their phones showed photographs they hadn't taken. One couple insisted they had passed the same dead tree 7 times, even though they had been walking in a straight line. We assumed it was confusion, poor visibility, and people getting turned around in dense forest. Then a 26-year-old man named Weston Pike disappeared there. Weston wasn't inexperienced. He was a professional photographer who had spent years hiking the Appalachians. His last message to his girlfriend was sent at 6:48 p.m. It said, "There's someone ahead of me wearing my jacket," she replied, asking what he meant. Weston sent another message 3 minutes later. "He just turned around." That was the last thing he ever sent. His vehicle was found at the trailhead. His camera bag was gone. His phone was inside the vehicle, which immediately made no sense. If Weston had been carrying his phone, he couldn't have left it behind unless he intentionally returned to the truck. We searched the trail that night and found nothing. The following morning, a trail camera captured Weston walking into the forest at 6:31 p.m. But there was something strange about the footage. The camera recorded him entering the trail twice. The first time was at 6:31. The second was at 6:36, 5 minutes apart. Same clothes, same backpack, same camera, same face. Both versions of Weston walked in exactly the same way. Neither one came back. We initially assumed the camera had malfunctioned. Then we checked another camera farther down the trail. It showed Weston walking past at 6:44. Again, the footage showed him twice. 2 identical Westons walking past the camera 14 seconds apart. The first looked toward the camera. The second didn't. I remember watching that footage with my supervisor and thinking it had to be a technical error. Then we noticed something that made the room go quiet. In the second recording, the timestamp was wrong. It showed 6:44 p.m., but the weather data proved the camera had been completely covered in darkness at that exact time. There shouldn't have been enough light to see Weston at all, yet the footage was bright and perfectly clear. That night, I volunteered to patrol Hollow Creek alone. My supervisor told me not to, but I wanted to see the trail while the search was still active. I started at 9:17 p.m. with a body camera, thermal scope, satellite phone, GPS, and a handheld radio. The forest was completely still. No wind, no insects. Even the creek was unusually quiet. About 2 miles in, I found Weston's camera bag hanging from a branch. Inside were 6 memory cards. I checked the first one using the field reader. The photographs showed landscapes, waterfalls, trees, and wildlife. Normal stuff. Then I opened the last folder. Every photograph showed the same trail. In every image, Weston was standing somewhere in the background. Sometimes 20 feet away. Sometimes 50. Sometimes barely visible between the trees. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was always looking at me. I had never met Weston before he disappeared. Yet the photographs showed him watching me. I checked the timestamps. Some images had been taken that evening. Others were dated weeks into the future. One photograph was time-stamped 3 days later. It showed me sleeping inside my Ranger truck. Another showed me standing at my kitchen window. I shut the laptop immediately. My radio crackled. "Ranger?" I heard my supervisor. "Yeah," I answered. "Where are you?" "Hollow Creek." He paused. "You're not there." I looked at my GPS. It showed me standing exactly where I was. "I'm looking at your location," he said. "Your tracker says you're still at headquarters." I checked the satellite device again. The location had changed. It now showed me inside the ranger station. I looked up at the trees. Something moved between them. I raised my flashlight. A man was standing on the trail about 80 yards away. He was wearing a dark jacket. I couldn't see his face. I called out, "Weston!" He didn't answer. I took one step forward. He took one step backward. I stepped again. He stepped back again. Then he turned around and walked into the woods. I followed. I don't know why. Rangers are trained to maintain distance from unknown people, especially at night. But something about him felt familiar. I followed for several minutes until I reached a clearing I had never seen before. In the center was an old picnic table. Sitting on it was Weston, alive. He looked exhausted. His clothes were dirty. His face was pale. He stared at me and said, "You're early." I asked where he'd been. He said, "I haven't been anywhere." I told him we'd been searching for him for 2 days. He shook his head. "It's been about 20 minutes. I asked him what happened. He looked toward the trees. I saw myself. I thought he meant in a reflection. He shook his head. No. I saw another me. He walked past me on the trail. I followed him because I thought he was trying to show me something. Weston swallowed hard. "He led me here." I asked what was here. Weston pointed toward the trees. "Watch." A figure walked out of the darkness. It was Weston. Same face, same jacket, same backpack, same camera. The man stopped beside the picnic table and looked at us. Real Weston whispered, "That's him." The duplicate smiled. I reached for my weapon. The duplicate raised both hands. "Easy," he said. His voice sounded exactly like Weston. "I'm not the problem." Real Weston started shaking. "Don't listen to him." The duplicate looked at him. "You know what happens if he leaves?" Real Weston didn't answer. The duplicate turned toward me. "He takes your place?" I asked what he meant. Neither man answered. Then the duplicate pointed behind me. "There's another one coming." I turned. Another figure was standing at the edge of the clearing. This one looked like me. Same uniform, same face, same flashlight. It smiled. I raised my weapon. "Don't move." It stopped. Real Weston whispered, "That's not you." My duplicate tilted its head. "Of course it is." Then every light on my equipment turned off simultaneously. My flashlight, my body camera, my GPS, even the small indicator on my radio. Complete darkness. I heard Weston screaming. Something crashed into the picnic table. I heard footsteps running in every direction. I fired one round into the air. The sound echoed through the trees. Then everything went silent. My flashlight came back on. Weston was gone. The duplicate was gone. The clearing was empty. I ran back toward the trail, but every path seemed unfamiliar. I kept checking my GPS. It showed me moving in circles even though I was walking straight. At 2:06 a.m., I finally reached a road. My patrol truck was parked there. The engine was running. I got inside and drove directly back to the station. When I arrived, my supervisor was waiting outside. He looked at me strangely. "Where the hell have you been?" I told him what happened. He didn't answer. Instead, he asked me to follow him inside. On the security monitor, we watched the station's exterior camera. It showed me arriving at the building at 2:11 a.m. I watched myself get out of the truck. I walked toward the entrance. Then I stopped. I looked directly at the camera. I smiled. I walked inside. My supervisor turned toward me. "You never came inside." I stared at the screen. "What?" He pointed toward the hallway. "You've been standing right there for almost 40 minutes. I looked toward the hallway. I was standing there. Another me. Exactly like me. Same uniform. Same face. Same equipment. It slowly raised one hand and waved. I drew my weapon. My supervisor shouted, "Don't!" The other me smiled and said, "He's the one who followed me." I don't remember what happened after that. The next thing I remember, I was sitting inside a hospital emergency room with a concussion. My supervisor told investigators that he had watched two versions of me enter the station. One came through the front door. The other appeared on the security cameras without ever physically entering. They never found Weston. Search teams spent another 3 weeks covering Hollow Creek. They found his camera bag, his backpack, and eventually his boots sitting neatly beside the creek. No body, no footprints, nothing else. I requested a transfer immediately. Before I left, I asked my supervisor to show me the final trail camera footage from Hollow Creek. He hesitated, then played it. The footage showed Weston walking into the forest at 6:31 p.m., then another Weston at 6:36, then another at 6:44, then another at 7:02, then another at 7:19, then another at 7:41. There were dozens, each one walking deeper into the forest. The final frame was time-stamped 2:08 a.m. It showed me standing on the trail. I was facing the camera. Behind me were dozens of people. Weston, me, other hikers, rangers, men and women I had never seen before, all standing silently between the trees. And every single one of them was smiling. I left the park 2 weeks later. I haven't returned since. But something followed me home. 3 months after the incident, I found a photograph on my kitchen table. I don't own a printer. The photograph showed me asleep in my bedroom. The image had been taken from the doorway. On the back, someone had written 5 words. "You left him in the woods." I burned it. The next morning, another photograph was waiting on the table. This one showed me burning the first photograph. In the corner of the image, reflected in the window, Weston Pike was standing behind me. And he wasn't smiling anymore. He was pointing at the camera. I don't know who took that picture. I don't know how they got into my house. But every few weeks, another photograph appears. Always from somewhere closer. The last one was taken yesterday. It showed me sitting at my desk, reading this exact report. And behind my chair, just barely visible in the darkness, was a man wearing Weston's jacket. His hand was resting on my shoulder. I live alone. Story 5. I was halfway through a 12-hour night patrol in the Appalachian backcountry when dispatch received an emergency call from my personal phone, and the caller was me. It happened in October 2025, during a stretch of unusually cold weather that had already closed several mountain roads. I was assigned to a remote district in West Virginia, where an abandoned section of trail ran along a steep ridge locals called Blackwater Spur. The trail had been closed for years after several rock slides, but hikers still occasionally ignored the signs. At 1:26 a.m., dispatch radioed me and said they had received an emergency call from a phone registered to me. I checked my pocket. My phone was there. "What did the caller say?" I asked. The dispatcher hesitated. He said, "I'm Ranger Mercer. I'm injured. I'm at Blackwater Spur. Don't send anyone after me." I laughed nervously and told her I was sitting in my patrol vehicle 30 miles from the location. Then she played the recording. My voice came through the radio. It sounded exhausted, frightened. "If you're hearing this, don't come looking for me. Whatever you hear on the trail, don't answer it." Then there was a long silence. My voice whispered, "He's learned how I sound." The call ended. I checked my phone. There was no outgoing call, no recording, no evidence anything had happened. I should have stayed at the station. Instead, I drove toward Blackwater Spur. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone had stolen an old recording. But I knew my own voice, and whoever made that call knew things only I should have known. At 2:17 a.m., I reached the trailhead. The gate was locked. Fresh footprints crossed the mud beneath it. One set. Ranger boots, my boot size. I followed them. After about half a mile, my radio clicked. "Ranger?" It was dispatch. I answered. "Go ahead," she said. "We lost your GPS." I looked at the device mounted on my vest. The screen showed no signal. Then my phone vibrated. A new emergency message appeared. "You should have listened." I stopped walking. Something moved uphill. I raised my flashlight. Nothing. Then I heard my own voice from somewhere beyond the trees. "Ranger, help me." I didn't answer. The voice came again. "Please, I'm hurt." I kept walking. "Please don't leave me." It sounded exactly like me, except there was something wrong with the breathing between the words. It sounded like someone trying to imitate human breathing after only hearing it through a recording. I reached the ridge and found my patrol flashlight lying in the dirt. It was one of the older units assigned to me 2 years earlier. I had lost it during a winter rescue and never recovered it. It was turned on. The beam pointed toward a narrow opening between two rocks. Behind it was a shallow cave. Inside, I found a folding chair, a portable radio, several empty water bottles, and dozens of photographs. Every photograph showed me. Not random pictures of me from public records. Me working, me sleeping in my truck, me eating lunch, me walking through the station. One showed me standing in my kitchen. Another showed me showering. I dropped the photographs. Then the radio on the floor activated. "You found them!" It was my voice again. I kicked the radio away. The speaker continued. "You always find them," I shouted. "Who are you?" Silence. Then a different voice answered. "You!" I stepped outside. My flashlight caught a figure standing 50 yards away. He was wearing my old ranger jacket. I couldn't see his face. I called out, "Stay where you are." The figure raised one hand. Then my personal phone rang. I answered without thinking. My own voice whispered through the speaker. "Don't let him touch you." I looked at the figure. He was suddenly closer. 30 yards. I hadn't seen him move. "Who are you?" I asked. He tilted his head. "You already know." Then he spoke my name. Not my ranger name. My childhood nickname. Something nobody at the park knew. I stepped backward. He took another step forward. I raised my weapon. "Stop." He stopped. Then he smiled. I couldn't see his face clearly, but somehow I knew he was smiling. "You can't shoot me," he said. "You don't know which one of us is real." I heard a branch break behind me. I turned for half a second. When I looked back, the figure was gone. My radio crackled. Dispatch shouted, "Ranger, get out of there now!" I asked why. She said, "We're looking at your body camera feed." I checked my camera. It was still recording. She said, "There's someone standing directly behind you." I turned around. Nothing. She continued screaming through the radio. "He's right there!" Then my body camera shut off. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the trailhead. My truck was exactly where I had left it. I got inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. My phone rang again. I answered. My own voice said, "You left me." I hung up. It rang again. "You left me." Again. "You left me." I turned the phone off. It continued ringing. I threw it onto the passenger seat. The screen was black, but I could still hear the ringtone. I drove back to the station. When I arrived, dispatch was waiting. She looked at me and immediately asked, "Where's your uniform?" I looked down. I was wearing my uniform. She shook her head. "No. You left the station tonight wearing a different one." I told her I hadn't left the station before going to Blackwater Spur. She stared at me. Then she showed me security footage. At 1:03 a.m., I had walked out of the ranger station. At 1:05, I drove away. The problem was, according to the station's records, I had been sitting in the patrol room the entire night. Everyone had seen me there. 2 versions of me had been working at the same time. One had left. One had stayed. I asked which one was me. Nobody answered. The next morning, investigators searched Blackwater Spur. They found the cave, but it was empty. No chair, no radio, no photographs, no footprints. They did find one thing: my personal phone buried beneath a tree. It was turned off. When they powered it on, there was one new video file. I watched it once. I refused to watch it again. The video showed me walking alone through Blackwater Spur at 2:21 a.m. I was talking to someone off camera. Then I looked directly into the lens and said, "If you're watching this, I'm still inside." The camera moved. Another version of me stepped into view. He put his hand on my shoulder. I screamed. The video ended. I resigned from the park 6 months later. I changed my phone number. I moved to another state. I don't work outdoors anymore. I don't even go hiking. But 3 weeks ago, my new phone received an emergency alert at exactly 1:26 a.m. The notification wasn't from any government agency. It contained only an audio file. I played it. My voice whispered, "Ranger, I found the way out." Then another voice answered from somewhere behind it. My voice again. "No, you found the way in." The recording ended. A second later, my phone camera opened by itself. The screen showed my bedroom. I was sitting on the edge of my bed. I was looking directly at the camera. And standing behind me was the man from Blackwater Spur. He leaned toward the screen and whispered one final sentence. "He's been wearing your face longer than you have." Story 6. At 2:13 a.m. on a freezing Tuesday in February 2026, I received a call from a hiker who claimed he was trapped beneath Trail 9 in the Appalachian backcountry. I remember the exact wording because the call was recorded and later reviewed by federal investigators. The man said, "Ranger, I'm underneath the trail, and something is walking around down here pretending to be me." Then the line went dead. His emergency location placed him nearly 30 feet below the actual trail surface, inside solid rock. There were no caves marked on any park map, no mining shafts, no tunnels, nothing. I was assigned to investigate because I was already working the night shift nearby. His name was Everett Sloan, a 41-year-old contractor from Ohio. His vehicle was found at the trailhead with the doors unlocked and his backpack still inside. The strangest thing was his phone. It was lying on the driver's seat, still connected to the emergency call. When I picked it up, I heard breathing coming from the speaker. I assumed the call had somehow remained connected, so I said, "Everett, can you hear me?" A man's voice answered immediately. "Yes." I asked where he was. He said, "You're standing above me." I looked down at the pavement. "How far below?" I asked. He whispered, "Don't worry about that. I'm not alone anymore." I contacted dispatch and began hiking toward Trail 9. The temperature was 12 degrees and a heavy wind was moving through the trees. About 20 minutes into the hike, I heard someone calling my name from below the trail. "Ranger Vale." I stopped. The voice sounded exactly like Everett. "I'm down here." I scanned the ground. Nothing. Then he called again. "Please don't let him find me." I told him to stay where he was. His answer came immediately. "I am staying here." He's the one moving. I heard footsteps beneath my boots. Not above the ground. Beneath it. Slow footsteps, traveling through the rock. I moved away from the sound and found a narrow depression beside the trail. Cold air was coming out of a crack. I knelt down and heard Everett whispering. "He's close." I asked him if there was an opening. "Yes," he said, "but don't come inside." I asked why. He said, "Because I already did." I didn't understand. Then a second voice spoke through the crack. It was my voice. "Ranger Vale, I found him." I immediately stood up. My radio began transmitting at the same time. "Ranger Vale, I found him." I looked at the radio. It wasn't coming from dispatch. The signal was coming from somewhere underneath me. I backed away and called for another unit. While waiting, I heard something scratching against the rock below. Then a hand appeared through the crack. Human fingers. Pale. Dirty. The hand slowly opened and closed like it was trying to grab the air. I raised my flashlight toward it. A face suddenly appeared behind the fingers. Everett. His eyes were wide and bloodshot. He looked directly at me. "Please," he whispered. "Don't let me out." Before I could respond, something grabbed him from behind and pulled him backward into the darkness. His scream echoed through the rock. I drew my weapon and shouted that I was going to help him, but another voice answered from the crack. "Don't." This time it was Everett again. That wasn't me. I stepped backward. The second ranger unit arrived 20 minutes later. We searched the entire area. The crack was gone. Just solid rock. The GPS coordinates from Everett's phone showed something impossible. His location had moved continuously beneath the mountain for almost 3 hours. We followed the signal to another section of the trail nearly a mile away. There, we found a small hole in the ground, large enough for a person to crawl through. Inside was an underground chamber. It contained clothing, backpacks, shoes, wallets, and dozens of identification cards belonging to missing hikers from the last 15 years. But there was no blood. No bodies. Nothing that explained where they had gone. In the center of the room was a wooden chair facing a wall. On the wall were hundreds of names carved into the stone. At the bottom was one name that had been freshly carved. Mine. Underneath it were 4 words. "He knows your voice now." We left immediately. Search teams returned the next morning with specialized equipment, but the chamber was gone. The entrance had collapsed overnight. Everett Sloan was never found. His phone was recovered from the trail, but the battery was completely dead. Investigators extracted one final audio file from it. The recording lasted 11 minutes. For the first 8 minutes, Everett was crying and begging someone to leave him alone. Then there was silence. At the 8-minute mark, a voice spoke. It sounded exactly like me. "Everett, I'm here to help you." Everett answered, "You're not him." The voice laughed. Then Everett whispered something that made every investigator in the room go silent. He said, "You don't understand. He isn't copying people anymore." There was another pause. Then Everett said, "He's learning what comes next." The recording ended. 3 months later, I was transferred to another district. I thought I had finally left Trail 9 behind. Then one night, while reviewing old emergency recordings, I found a file I had never seen before. The date was 2 days after Everett disappeared. The audio began with static. Then I heard footsteps. My footsteps. After several seconds, my own voice said, "This is Ranger Vale. I'm entering Trail 9 now." I heard myself walk away. Then another version of my voice whispered from somewhere underneath the recording, "He's coming back." I stopped the file. I haven't listened to it since. But every winter, around 2:13 in the morning, my emergency phone receives a location ping from beneath Trail 9. No message, no caller ID, just coordinates buried 30 feet under solid rock. And last week, for the first time, the notification included a photograph. It showed me standing on Trail 9. I was looking directly into the camera. Behind me, barely visible between the trees, was Everett Sloane. His mouth was open like he was screaming. And underneath the photograph was a caption I know I didn't write. "He's not under the trail anymore." Story 7. The first thing I noticed about the cabin was that someone had been inside it recently. And the second thing I noticed was that the person had left while I was standing outside. It was November 2025, deep in the Appalachian backcountry, and I was working an overnight patrol through a section of forest where the trails had been closed after a series of illegal camps were discovered. At 11:36 p.m., my satellite phone received an emergency message from an abandoned fire lookout nearly 6 miles from the nearest road. The message contained no name, no coordinates, nothing except one sentence. "Please check the cabin. He is still inside." I was the only ranger close enough to respond. The cabin was an old stone and timber structure used decades earlier by forestry crews. It wasn't supposed to have electricity, but when I reached it, a yellow light was glowing through the curtains. I parked my truck 50 yards away and approached on foot. The front door was unlocked. Inside, a wood stove was burning. A coffee cup sat on the table, still warm. There were muddy footprints across the floor. I followed them toward the back bedroom, but they stopped at the wall. I radioed dispatch. "I'm inside the cabin," static answered. Then a voice came through. My voice. "I'm inside the cabin." I froze. I looked at my radio. It was transmitting my words before I had spoken them. I switched it off. From upstairs came a slow creaking sound. The cabin had no upstairs. I drew my weapon and moved toward the staircase anyway. At the top was a hallway that shouldn't have existed. 4 doors, all closed. I opened the first. Empty bedroom. Second. Empty. Third. Empty. The 4th door was locked. I heard someone breathing behind it. "Park ranger," I called. "Step away from the door." The breathing stopped. Then a man's voice answered. "You shouldn't have come back." I asked who he was. He said, "You know who I am." I didn't. Then he said my full name. Not my ranger name. My legal name. The name only my family and government records knew. I stepped backward. The hallway suddenly seemed longer. Much longer. I looked toward the stairs and couldn't see them anymore. Every door on the hallway was now open. Every room was empty except the last one. The locked door was standing wide open. Inside was a small bedroom with an old television. The television was turned on. It showed a live feed from my body camera. I was standing in the hallway, watching myself on the screen. Then the camera view shifted. Someone was standing behind me. I turned around. Nothing. On the television, however, the figure moved closer. It was wearing my ranger uniform. Then it leaned toward the camera and whispered, "He's going to turn around again." I didn't. I shut the television off and ran toward where I remembered the staircase. My hand hit the railing. I went down the stairs 2 at a time and burst through the front door. My truck was gone. I was standing in the middle of the forest. The cabin was behind me. But when I turned around again, there was no cabin. Just trees. My satellite phone showed no signal. My GPS showed me inside the cabin. I walked for almost an hour until I found a trail marker. I recognized it. It was less than half a mile from the main road. I followed the trail and eventually saw my truck parked ahead. The driver's door was open. I approached slowly. Inside, my keys were in the ignition. The heater was running. On the passenger seat was a paper map. Someone had circled the cabin in red ink. Underneath it was written, "He comes back when you leave." I called dispatch from the truck. This time they answered immediately. I told them everything. There was a long silence. Then the dispatcher asked me something that made my stomach drop. "What cabin?" I gave her the location. She told me there hadn't been a cabin there since 1987. A wildfire had destroyed it. I argued with her. I told her I had just been inside. She said the area had been searched several times. Nothing remained except the stone foundation. I drove back with the 2nd Ranger unit the following morning. We found the foundation. No cabin, no footprints, no fire, no coffee cup, nothing. But we found something else. Buried beneath the foundation was an old metal Ranger locker. Inside was a photograph from 1986. 4 forestry workers were standing outside the cabin. One of them was wearing the exact same uniform style I had been wearing the previous night. His face looked remarkably similar to mine. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten note. "He doesn't know he's the one who never left." I left the park 6 months later. I still have the photograph. I keep it locked away because every few months something changes in it. The first time, one of the 4 men disappeared. The next time, another was missing. Last month, only 2 men remained. The ranger who looks like me was still standing there, and beside him was an empty space. I checked the photograph again yesterday. There are 3 people now. The 3rd person is standing behind them. His face is turned toward the camera. He's wearing my current uniform, and in his hand is a coffee cup. The same kind I left on the table that night. It's still warm. Story 8. I had been a ranger in the Appalachian backcountry long enough to know that people lie about what they see in the woods, usually because they're embarrassed, frightened, drunk, or trying to make an ordinary story sound extraordinary. But what happened near milepost 42 was different because 4 separate people described the same woman. Before any of them knew, the others had seen her. And none of them survived long enough to explain what they actually encountered. It began on a rainy Sunday in September 2025, when a couple driving through the mountains stopped at a closed overlook after midnight and called emergency services. The woman who made the call was whispering so quietly that the dispatcher could barely understand her. She said there was a woman standing beside the road wearing a white sweater, barefoot, soaking wet, and covered in mud. The dispatcher asked if she needed help. The caller said, "No, she wants us to stop." Then the line went dead. A patrol officer reached the location 11 minutes later and found the couple's SUV abandoned with both front doors open. The engine was still running. Their phones were inside. Their shoes were inside. There was no sign of either person. The only thing the officer found was a trail of wet footprints leading away from the vehicle and into the forest. They were barefoot. We were called in because the area fell inside our district. I arrived at 2:06 a.m. with another ranger named Blaine Mercer, and the first thing we noticed was that the footprints didn't look like they belonged to 2 people. There was only one set. The strange part was that they went into the woods but never came back out. We followed them for almost half a mile until they stopped beside an old milepost. Someone had carved a woman's name into the wood. Mara Voss. I recognized it immediately. Mara Voss had disappeared in that exact area 11 years earlier. She had been 29 years old, hiking alone, and despite a massive search, nobody ever found her body. I told Blaine about her. He stared at the name for a few seconds and said, "That's impossible." I asked why. He pointed at the fresh cuts in the wood. "Because this isn't 11 years old." He was right. The carving was fresh. The wood chips were still on the ground. We photographed it and continued searching. At 3:14 a.m., my radio received a transmission from the missing woman's phone. Her voice whispered, She's standing behind you. I turned around. Nothing. Blaine was standing 20 feet away. I looked at him. He was staring into the trees. You heard that too? I asked. He nodded. Then a woman's voice came from the darkness. Blaine! He went completely still. The voice sounded familiar to him. He whispered, "That's my sister." His sister had been dead for 8 years. I told him not to answer. The voice called again. "Blaine, please." He took one step toward the trees. I grabbed his arm. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "That's her voice." I told him I didn't care. We were leaving. Then the woman stepped out between the trees. She was barefoot, white sweater, long dark hair, mud covering her legs. She looked exactly like the description from the original emergency call. She stood 30 feet away and stared at us. Her face was completely expressionless. Blaine whispered, "Mara." The woman smiled. Then she said his name. Not my name. His. "Blaine Mercer." He raised his flashlight. Her eyes reflected the light. It looked almost black. She lifted one hand and pointed behind us. "They're waiting." I turned. There were dozens of footprints in the mud now. Bare feet. Different sizes. All leading toward us from the forest. None leading away. We ran. We didn't stop until we reached the vehicle. Blaine locked the doors and started the engine. I looked through the windshield. The woman was standing beside the road. She wasn't following us. She was simply watching. As we drove away, I looked back through the rear window. She was still there. Then, for 1 second, I saw someone standing beside her. A man. Then another. Then another. People of different ages. Different clothes. All staring at the road. We reached headquarters at sunrise. Blaine didn't speak the entire drive. When we arrived, the dispatcher told us something strange. The original couple had been found. Not in the forest. Their SUV had been located 15 miles away at a gas station. Both were alive. Both claimed they had never stopped at the overlook. They said they had driven straight through the night. We showed them photographs of their abandoned SUV. They didn't recognize it. The license plate matched their vehicle. Their fingerprints were on the doors. Their phones were inside. The couple became terrified when they saw the photograph of Mara Voss. The woman began crying. "That's her," she whispered. I asked what she meant. She said, "She was sitting in our back seat." That was the moment we realized the situation was far worse than a missing person case. We searched Mara's original disappearance records. There was one detail buried in an old report that nobody had ever paid attention to. 3 days before she vanished, Mara had called a ranger and reported seeing a woman beside the trail. The ranger wrote that Mara was convinced the woman was following her. Mara described her as barefoot, wearing a white sweater and covered in mud. Exactly the same description we had received 11 years later. The ranger dismissed the report. 2 days after that, Mara disappeared. We returned to milepost 42 with a larger team. During daylight, the forest looked completely ordinary. We found no cabin, no cave, no evidence of people living there. Then one of the search dogs stopped beside the milepost and began growling. We dug around the base and found a metal box buried beneath the roots. Inside were photographs. Hundreds of them. Every photograph showed people standing near the road. Hikers, hunters, families, rangers. Some photographs were decades old. Others had dates from weeks in the future. In almost every picture, the same woman appeared somewhere in the background. Barefoot, white sweater, watching. Then we found a photograph that made everyone stop. It showed Blaine and me standing beside the milepost. The date printed on the photograph was 2 days from then. We left immediately. That night, Blaine called me from his home. He sounded terrified. He said someone was standing outside his bedroom window. I told him to lock the doors and stay inside. He whispered, "It's Mara." Then the call went silent. I drove to his house with 2 officers. We arrived 7 minutes later. The front door was locked. All the windows were closed. Blaine's car was in the driveway. His phone was on the kitchen table. But Blaine was gone. There were muddy footprints across the floor. Bare footprints. They led upstairs. His bedroom door was open. The footprints stopped beside the window. The window was locked from the inside. There was no other exit. On the glass, someone had written 4 words with a muddy finger. "She doesn't need doors." Blaine was never found. 6 months later, I left the Ranger Service. I thought about the case often, especially the photograph buried under the milepost. Then, almost a year after Blaine disappeared, I received an envelope at my new apartment. No return address. Inside was one photograph. I recognized the location immediately. Milepost 42. The photograph showed the road at night. The woman in the white sweater was standing beside the milepost. Blaine was standing behind her. Mara Voss was behind him, and behind Mara were dozens of other missing people. They were all looking toward the camera. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "You were supposed to be in this one." I threw the photograph away. The next morning, it was back on my kitchen table. This time, there was something different. Someone had written a new date on the bottom corner. Tomorrow. I haven't slept since. And tonight, at exactly 2:06 a.m., someone knocked 3 times on my apartment door. I checked the security camera. The hallway was empty. Then my phone received a notification from an unknown number. One photograph. It showed my apartment door from the other side. I was standing inside it. The camera was pointed directly at me. And in the reflection of the peephole, I could see the woman in the white sweater standing behind my shoulder, barefoot, soaked from the rain, smiling. Story 9. The first thing I saw was a campfire burning in a place where no campsite had existed for more than 20 years. And the second thing I saw was a man sitting beside it who looked directly at me and said, "You're finally here." My name is Coulter Rains, and at the time I was working overnight backcountry patrols in a remote Appalachian district in Virginia. It was December 2025, bitterly cold, and the forest was covered in a thin layer of snow. At 11:52 p.m., dispatch received an automated emergency beacon from a GPS device registered to a missing hiker named Harlan Wicks. Harlan had disappeared 3 days earlier while hiking alone. Search crews had found his vehicle, his backpack, and 1 boot, but no sign of him. His GPS beacon had been considered destroyed because its battery should have died 48 hours earlier. Yet that night, it suddenly activated. The coordinates placed him deep inside a section of forest closed to the public. I drove as far as the road allowed and continued on foot. The snow made the forest almost completely silent. About 40 minutes into the hike, I saw a faint orange glow between the trees. At first, I thought it was a reflection from my flashlight. Then I smelled smoke. I reached a clearing and saw a campsite. Tent, sleeping bag, lantern, fire. Everything looked recently used. A man was sitting beside the flames with his back toward me. I called out, "Park ranger! Everything okay?" The man slowly turned his head. It was Harlan Wicks. He smiled. "You're finally here." I immediately called dispatch. No signal. I tried my satellite radio. Nothing. Harlan stood up. He looked completely healthy, except for one strange detail. His clothes were covered in wet mud, despite the ground being frozen. I asked where he had been. He said, "Right here." I told him his family had reported him missing. He looked confused. "I've only been here tonight." I checked his identification. It matched. His driver's license was current. His face matched the photograph. But when I asked him what day it was, he said, "Thursday." It was Saturday. I told him that. He laughed. "No, it's Thursday." I asked him how long he had been camping. He looked at the fire. "About an hour." Then I noticed something hanging from a tree behind him. Dozens of photographs. Everyone showed the same campsite. Different years. Different people. Some photographs were dated 20 years earlier. Others had dates from the future. I walked closer. One photograph showed a family sitting around the fire. Another showed a group of hikers. Another showed 3 rangers. The final photograph showed me. I was standing beside the fire. The date printed in the corner was the next morning. I turned toward Harlan. He was staring at the photograph. "You shouldn't look at those," he said. I asked him who took them. He didn't answer. Then something moved inside the tent. I drew my weapon. "Who's in there?" Harlan whispered. "Don't wake him." I opened the tent flap. Inside was another man sleeping. He was wearing an old ranger uniform. I recognized the patch immediately. It belonged to a ranger who had disappeared in 2003. His name was Silas Boone. I had seen his photograph in the department archives. He was still wearing the uniform he had vanished in. I stepped backward. The sleeping man opened his eyes. He looked directly at me. "You're late," he whispered. Then he closed his eyes again. I turned toward Harlan. He was gone. The fire was still burning. I ran into the forest. After several minutes, I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't look back. I heard Harlan calling my name. Then Silas. Then voices I didn't recognize. They kept calling me from different directions. I reached the trail and finally got a satellite signal. I called dispatch. "I found the campsite," I said. The dispatcher was silent. "What campsite?" she asked. I gave her the coordinates. She said, "Coulter, there's nothing there." I looked behind me. The campsite was gone. Only snow. I told her about Harlan and Silas. She asked me to repeat Silas's name. When I did, she went quiet. Then she said, "Coulter." Silas Boone was my grandfather. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She told me Silas had disappeared in 2003 at the age of 47. Her mother had been 6 years old at the time. I asked why she had his personnel file. She said, "Because we found his body last week." My stomach dropped. "Where?" She said, "In the woods near the old campground." I asked what condition he was in. She said, "He looked like he had been dead for 22 years. Then she asked me something that made my hands go cold. "Did he say anything to you?" I told her he said I was late. She stopped breathing for a moment. Then she said, "That's what he told my grandmother the night before he disappeared." I returned to the station before sunrise. Investigators searched the coordinates the following morning. They found nothing. But they found Harlan's missing boot about 300 yards away. Inside the boot was a folded piece of paper. Written on it were 4 words: "Don't sleep by fire." Harlan was never found. His GPS beacon activated again 3 months later. Same coordinates, same campsite. This time, the transmission contained a photograph. It showed Harlan sitting beside the fire. He looked older, much older. His beard was grey. His face was thin. He was staring at the camera with tears running down his cheeks. Behind him stood Silas Boone. Behind Silas were dozens of missing hikers, and behind all of them was me. I was standing beside the fire with my back to the camera. I had never been there. The photograph was time-stamped 11 years in the future. I left the ranger service shortly afterward. I thought the campsite was finally behind me. Then, last winter, I received a package at my house. Inside was a burned piece of wood. It was a section of the tree where the photographs had been hanging. Carved into it were 2 words: "Your turn." That night, at exactly 11:52 p.m., my phone received an emergency beacon notification. I already knew where it was coming from. The coordinates were for my own backyard. I looked outside. There was snow on the ground. In the middle of my yard, where my garden normally sits, a small campfire was burning. A tent stood beside it, and someone was sitting next to the flames. I couldn't see his face. Then my phone buzzed again. 1 new photograph. It showed me standing outside my house, looking toward the fire. The timestamp was tomorrow morning. I watched the person beside the fire slowly stand up. He lifted one hand and waved. Then my phone displayed the final message: "Coulter, you're finally here." Story 10. The first sign that something was wrong with Warren Bellamy was that he knew the ranger station was going to receive his missing person report before anyone had even reported him missing. It was 4:18 p.m. on a rainy October afternoon in 2025, and I was finishing paperwork when a man walked into the station covered in mud. He looked exhausted, soaked to the skin, and badly dehydrated. He told me his name was Warren Bellamy and said he had been hiking alone on a closed section of Appalachian Trail for 3 days. I immediately recognized the name. Warren had been reported missing that morning. His wife had called at 7:12 a.m. after he failed to return home. Search teams had already been preparing to deploy. I stared at him and asked, "Where have you been?" He looked confused. "Hiking." I asked him when he entered the trail. He said, "This morning." I checked the clock. He had been missing for almost 72 hours. Warren laughed nervously. "No, I left my house at 6. His story got stranger when I asked him about the trail. He described a section that had been closed since 2018 because of unstable cliffs. Then he gave me coordinates. I entered them into our mapping system. The location was more than 5 miles beyond the trail's official end. There was no marked path there. I asked him if anyone else had been with him. He said no. Then he looked over my shoulder toward the station window. "Is she still outside?" I turned around. Nobody was there. I asked who he meant. Warren stared at me. "The woman in the red coat." I looked outside again. Empty parking lot. Rain. Trees. Nothing else. Warren suddenly became agitated. "She's been following me since yesterday." I told him he was safe. He shook his head. "No. I'm safe now." "She's not." I thought he was suffering from exhaustion or exposure, so I contacted medical services. While we waited, Warren kept asking what day it was. Every time I told him, he became more confused. Then he asked me something I still remember word for word. "Did you find the other me?" I asked what he meant. He said, "The one that stayed behind." At 5:02 p.m., Warren's wife arrived at the station. The moment she saw him, she stopped walking. She stared at him for several seconds. Then she said, "That's not my husband." Warren looked at her and smiled. "Of course it is." She backed away. "No." Her hands began shaking. "That's not him." Warren's expression changed. He became completely still. I asked his wife how she could possibly know. She said, "My husband has a scar above his left eyebrow." Warren didn't. She pointed at his hands. He also broke his right index finger when he was 12. It bends slightly. Warren's finger was perfectly straight. I looked at Warren. He was still smiling. Then he said something that made his wife start crying. "You never noticed?" She whispered, "What?" He replied, "He stopped being your husband a long time ago." We restrained him when he suddenly tried to leave the building. He didn't fight. He simply kept smiling. Medical staff examined him. His blood work was normal. His fingerprints matched Warren Bellamy. His dental records matched. Even his DNA matched the samples from his home. There was no obvious explanation, but his wife refused to go near him. She kept repeating, "That's him on paper. That's not him." That night, I reviewed the search footage from the previous 3 days. One of our trail cameras had captured Warren entering the closed trail at 6:11 a.m. on Monday. He walked into the forest alone. 4 minutes later, another Warren appeared on the same trail. Same clothes. Same backpack. But this second one stopped beside the camera and looked directly into the lens. He raised one finger to his lips. Then he walked away. A third Warren appeared 7 minutes later. Then a fourth. Then a fifth. We counted 18 identical versions of him entering the forest over the next 2 hours. None came back. Except one. The final footage showed Warren walking out at 3:59 p.m. Thursday. The timestamp was impossible because we had physically found him at the station at 4:18. He walked toward the camera, stopped, and stared into it. Then he smiled. Behind him, deep in the trees, something wearing a red coat was standing perfectly still. I showed the footage to my supervisor. He ordered me to delete it. I refused. He told me there were things about that trail that had been deliberately left out of the public maps. I asked what he meant. He said, "The mountain doesn't always give people back the same way it took them." That night, Warren disappeared from the medical room. The doors had been locked. Security cameras showed him lying on the bed at 2:13 a.m. At 2:14, the lights flickered. At 2:15, the bed was empty. No door opened. No window moved. His clothes were still folded on the chair. His wedding ring was sitting on the pillow. We searched the station. Nothing. Then my personal phone rang. Warren's wife was calling. She was crying. "He's outside my house." I asked her to lock every door and window. She said, "I did." Then she whispered, "He's standing across the street." I asked her if she could see his face. She said yes. "He's smiling." Then she said, "There's someone standing behind him." The line went dead. Police arrived at her house within minutes. Nobody was there, but muddy footprints led from the street to the front door. There was another set of footprints beside them. Bare feet, smaller. We found Warren's wedding ring on the doorstep. He was never officially found again. His wife moved out of state. She refused to discuss what happened. I stayed in the park for another 6 months, mostly because I wanted to understand what we'd encountered. Then one evening, I received an alert from a trail camera on the closed section. I opened the photograph. Warren was standing in the forest. He looked exactly as he had the day he walked into the station. Behind him stood the woman in the red coat. Her face was hidden by wet hair. In front of Warren was another person. Me. I was standing with my back toward the camera. Warren's hand was resting on my shoulder. The timestamp was 3 days in the future. I requested a transfer the next morning. Before leaving, I checked every camera on that mountain. Most showed nothing, but camera 19 had one final image. It showed Warren standing alone. The woman in red was gone. I was gone too. Warren was looking directly at the camera. His expression was completely different now. No smile. No fear. Just exhaustion. Someone had written a message across the bottom of the image. "He's learning to stay longer." I thought that was the end. It wasn't. 6 months later, I received a letter at my new apartment. There was no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Warren standing in a crowded grocery store. Normal clothes, clean face, smiling. He looked completely human. Behind him, reflected in the freezer glass, stood the woman in the red coat. And beside her was another version of Warren. Then I noticed something in the corner of the photograph, a small digital date. The photograph had been taken that morning. On the back, written in the black ink, were 6 words. I think I finally remember you. Story 11. At 2:17 a.m. on a January morning in 2026, the emergency phone inside our Appalachian Ranger station rang, even though the building had been disconnected from the telephone network for 6 years. I was the only ranger on duty that night, sitting behind the front desk while freezing rain tapped against the windows. The station was an old stone building at the edge of the forest, and the landline had been removed years earlier when the department switched entirely to satellite communication. There shouldn't have been a phone connected anywhere inside that building. But the ringing came from the hallway. I walked toward it with my flashlight and found an old beige telephone sitting on a wooden shelf. I had never seen it before. It was ringing. I picked it up. A man's voice whispered, "Ranger, we're trapped inside." I asked who was calling. The man answered, "The night crew." I knew there hadn't been a night crew at that station in decades. I asked him where they were. He said, "Downstairs." There was no downstairs. Then he whispered, "Don't turn on the lights." I looked up at the hallway ceiling. Every fluorescent light suddenly switched on. The phone went silent. Then the emergency radio on my desk activated. A dispatcher said, "Unit 14, respond to the station immediately." I answered, "I'm already here." She paused. "No, you're not." I looked through the front window. My patrol truck was sitting outside. Then I heard another vehicle pull into the parking lot. Headlights swept across the walls. I walked toward the window. A second patrol truck had arrived. Same department markings. Same unit number. My name was printed on the driver's door. I stepped away from the window. Someone got out. I heard boots approaching the entrance. 3 knocks. I didn't answer. 3 more knocks. Then a voice said, "Ranger, open the door, it's me." It was my own voice. I backed away. The person outside knocked again. "I know you're in there." I reached for my radio and called dispatch. Nothing. I tried my satellite phone. No signal. The old telephone rang again. I answered. The voice on the other end whispered, "Whatever is outside, don't let it inside." I asked who he was. He said, "I'm you." Then the line went dead. The front door handle began turning slowly. I raised my weapon and backed into the records room. The handle stopped. Silent. Then I heard footsteps moving around the building. One window, then another, then another. Someone was walking outside, checking every room. I crouched beneath the desk and waited. After several minutes, the footsteps stopped directly outside the records room. A voice whispered through the door, "You don't remember this place, do you?" I didn't answer. The voice continued, "You worked here before." I knew that was impossible. I had only been assigned to the district 2 years earlier. Then the door opened. Nobody was standing there. I remained hidden. My radio suddenly crackled from the floor. "Ranger, if you're hearing this, listen carefully." It was the voice of my supervisor. "The station you're in was abandoned in 1984 after 4 Rangers disappeared." I stared at the radio. The transmission continued. The building was sealed because every time someone entered after midnight, the station would call them back. I whispered, "What does that mean?" The answer came from the old telephone behind me. "It means you're not the first." I turned around. The telephone receiver was hanging off the hook. Someone was breathing into it. Then the voice said, "And you won't be the last." I ran from the records room and headed for the main entrance. The door was gone. There was only a stone wall where the doorway had been. I slammed my hands against it. Nothing. I searched the building for another exit. Every hallway seemed different. Doors appeared where there had been walls. Rooms were larger inside than they could possibly be from the outside. I found a staircase leading down. I knew there was no basement, but I went down anyway because I could hear someone crying below. The staircase seemed endless. Eventually, I reached a concrete corridor. Old photographs were pinned to the walls. 4 rangers stood outside the station in every photograph. The same 4 men. Different years. Different seasons. Always the same faces. In the final photograph, taken in 1984, all 4 were staring at the camera. A 5th person stood behind them. I recognized him. It was me. I dropped the photograph. A door slammed somewhere down the corridor. Then the 4 rangers began speaking through the walls. "You came back. We knew you would. You left us here. You promised." I shouted that I didn't know them. One voice laughed. "You always say that." I reached the end of the corridor and found a room filled with old ranger uniforms. Dozens of them. Every uniform had a name tag. Some names were from the 1980s, some from the 1990s. Some were names I recognized from current park employees. One uniform had my name on it. I touched the fabric. It was warm, still damp from rain. My current uniform, the one I was wearing. I looked down. My shirt was gone. I was suddenly wearing the old uniform. My body camera was still attached. The camera indicator was blinking. Recording. I checked the footage. It showed me walking down the corridor from behind. But there was someone walking beside me. I wasn't alone. The figure turned toward the camera. It had my face. Then the recording ended. Behind me, someone whispered, "Your shift is over." I turned. The 4 missing rangers were standing in the doorway. They looked exactly as they had in the photographs. One of them stepped forward. "We've been waiting for you." I asked what they wanted. He said, "We need someone upstairs." Then the old telephone rang again. It was sitting on a small table in the corridor. I answered. My supervisor's voice came through. "Get out of the building." I told him I couldn't find the door. He said, "There is no door." Then he whispered, "The station doesn't exist anymore." I stared at the 4 men. They were smiling. I asked my supervisor what he meant. He said, "Look outside." I found a window at the end of the corridor. I looked through it. There was no forest, no parking lot, no mountains, just a huge empty black space. Then I saw hundreds of small lights moving inside it. They looked like flashlights. People were walking toward the station. Hundreds of them. Every one of them wearing ranger uniforms. I stepped away from the window. The 4 men began walking toward me. I ran. I don't remember how long I ran. Eventually, I found a door and threw it open. I fell onto wet pavement. It was dawn. I was lying beside my patrol truck outside the current ranger station. My supervisor and 2 deputies were standing over me. They told me I had been missing for 11 hours. I told them about the old station. They said there was no old station on that property. I insisted there was. Then my supervisor showed me something on his phone. A photograph from 1984. 4 rangers standing outside a stone building. I stared at it. The 5th person wasn't there. My supervisor zoomed in. The photograph showed the 4 men looking toward the camera. Behind them was an empty doorway. Then he showed me another photograph. It had been taken that morning. It showed me lying unconscious beside my patrol truck. Behind me, reflected in the vehicle window, stood the 4 missing Rangers. The old beige telephone was sitting on the hood. We never found out where it came from. The department removed it and locked it inside an evidence room. 3 nights later, the evidence room alarm went off. Officers found the telephone sitting on the floor. It was ringing. Nobody answered it. Eventually, the ringing stopped. Then the evidence room camera recorded something impossible. The receiver lifted by itself. A man's voice came through the speaker. "Ranger!" The officer watching the footage heard my voice. Then another voice whispered behind it. "We're trapped inside." The investigation was closed shortly afterward. I quit 6 months later. I don't talk about the station anymore. But every January, at exactly 2:17 a.m., my current phone rings from an unknown number. I never answer. Last winter, however, I made the mistake of looking at the screen. The caller ID displayed my own name. Beneath it was a location, Ranger Station, basement level. There is no basement under my house. Then the phone began playing a voicemail automatically. My own voice whispered, "Ranger, we're trapped inside." I heard myself breathing. Then another voice spoke very softly behind me. "Open the door." I haven't answered the phone since. But sometimes, late at night, I can hear a telephone ringing somewhere underneath my bedroom floor. And when it rings 3 times, something always knocks back. Story 12. The trail wasn't on the map when I checked it at 6:40 that morning. But by midnight, it had appeared behind the ranger station. And by sunrise, 3 people were missing. I was working the overnight shift in a remote Appalachian district in Kentucky in November 2025. The kind of place where the mountains were so densely wooded that you could stand 20 yards from another person and never see them. The weather had been miserable for days. Cold rain, heavy fog, and wind strong enough to knock branches onto the roads. At 11:47 p.m., a motion alert came through from a wildlife camera we had installed near an abandoned fire road. The camera had detected a person walking through an area that should have been completely empty. I opened the image on my tablet. A man was standing in the trees, staring directly into the camera. He wasn't wearing hiking gear. He had on a dark jacket, jeans, and a pair of old work boots. In his right hand was a flashlight. The timestamp was 11:43 p.m. 4 minutes later, another image appeared. The man was closer. Then another. Closer. Then the final image showed him standing directly in front of the camera. His face filled the entire frame. He was smiling. I zoomed in. His eyes were closed. I reported the sighting to dispatch and drove toward the fire road. When I arrived, I found something that immediately made me uncomfortable. A narrow dirt trail had appeared between the trees. It was completely covered in fresh mud, but there were no tire tracks or footprints leading to it. The trail wasn't on any of our maps. I checked the GPS database. Nothing. I checked the historical maps stored on my tablet. Nothing. I called dispatch and asked if they knew about a new access road. They said no. Then my radio crackled. A man's voice said, "It's been there for years." I asked who was transmitting. Silence. I started walking down the trail. After maybe 10 minutes, I found a hiking boot lying in the mud. It was still warm. Then I found another. Then a backpack. Inside was a wallet belonging to a missing college student named Briar Hensley, who had disappeared from the area 4 months earlier. Her photograph was still inside. I called her name into the darkness. Someone answered. "Help me." The voice sounded young. Female. I followed it. The trail began descending into a narrow valley. The fog became thicker. My GPS suddenly stopped updating. The screen showed the time as 3:17 a.m., even though my watch said 12:06. I assumed the GPS had malfunctioned. Then my watch changed too. 3:17. I looked around. The forest was completely silent. No wind, no rain, nothing. Then a phone began ringing somewhere ahead. I followed the sound and found a woman sitting beside a tree. It was Briar Hensley. She looked exactly like her missing person photograph. Her clothes were dirty, but she didn't look injured. She stared at me and said, "You're early." I asked her where she had been. She said, "Waiting." I told her we had been searching for her for months. She shook her head. "You haven't been searching for me?" I asked what she meant. She pointed deeper into the forest. "You've been searching for them." I heard footsteps. Several people were walking somewhere behind us. Briar grabbed my sleeve. "Don't look." I asked why. "Because they'll know you can see them." The footsteps stopped. I could feel someone standing behind me. Very close. Briar whispered, "Whatever happens, don't turn around." I did anyway. There was nobody there. But my body camera suddenly displayed a warning. Subject detected behind operator. I checked the live feed. The camera showed a person standing directly behind me. I turned again. Nothing. Briar started crying. "It knows you're looking." I asked her who it was. She said, "The trail." I thought she was delirious. Then she told me something that changed everything. She said the trail appeared only after someone disappeared. Every missing person eventually found it. Some returned. Some didn't. The ones who returned were never quite the same. I asked how she escaped. She said she hadn't. "I'm still there." I looked at her. She smiled sadly. "This isn't where you think it is." Then she pointed behind me. The trail was gone. We were standing in a large clearing. In the center were dozens of people. Men, women, hikers, hunters, children, old people. Some looked terrified. Some were sitting silently. Some were staring at the ground. Every one of them was wearing clothing from a different decade. Briar whispered, "These are the people who didn't come back." I counted at least 50. Then I saw something that made my stomach drop. Several of them were wearing ranger uniforms. One of them was wearing mine. I asked Briar who they were. She said, "People who thought they were rescuers." One ranger stepped forward. His uniform was old, but his face looked young. He said, "You shouldn't have come alone." I asked him how long he'd been there. He said, 2 days. Then he looked at the others. "For us." I didn't understand. He pointed toward the sky. "For you, it's been 5 months." I checked my watch. 12:19 a.m. Still, I tried to call dispatch. My radio only produced static. Then a voice came through. My supervisor. "Ranger, where are you?" I answered. "I found the missing people." He said, "What missing people?" I gave him the location. He became silent. Then he said, "We've been looking for you for 6 days." I looked at Briar. She was no longer beside me. I turned toward the crowd. She was standing among them. Her face was different now. Older. Much older. She whispered, "Don't answer when it calls your name." Then the forest around us began making a sound. At first it sounded like wind, then voices. Hundreds of voices whispering names. My name was among them. I ran. The crowd disappeared behind me. I followed the trail because it was the only thing I could see. The path twisted through the trees and eventually brought me back to the fire road. My patrol truck was there. The engine was running. I climbed inside and drove away. When I reached the ranger station, everyone was asleep. I checked the clock. 4:12 a.m. I had been gone for several hours. I woke my supervisor and told him everything. He looked at me like I was insane. Then he asked, "What trail?" I told him. He opened the park map. The fire road was there. The trail wasn't. I showed him the photographs from my body camera. Every image was corrupted except one. It showed Briar Hensley standing beside the tree. But behind her were hundreds of people. The timestamp said 6 months in the future. My supervisor stared at it for a long time. Then he whispered, "That's impossible." I asked him why. He said, "Because Briar's body was found 4 months ago." I felt cold all over. "Where?" he said. "At the bottom of a ravine near the fire road." I looked at the photograph again. Briar was still standing there. She looked directly into the camera. Her lips were moving. I increased the volume. Her voice came through faintly. "You're early." I left the park 3 months later. I don't hike anymore. I don't camp. I don't even like driving near mountains after dark. But the trail didn't stay behind. Last week I woke up at 3:17 a.m. to find muddy footprints across my hallway. Bare feet. They led from my front door to my bedroom. There was no sign of anyone entering the house. At the end of the footprints was a piece of wet paper. It was a map. My map. The same one from the ranger station. Except now there was a new trail drawn across it in black ink. It started at my house and disappeared into the Appalachian Mountains. At the bottom, someone had written, "You found the trail. Now, it has found you." Then my phone vibrated, a wildlife camera notification. I opened it. The photograph showed the fire road. The impossible trail was there. Standing at its entrance was Briar Hensley. Behind her were the missing hikers. And directly behind them, barely visible in the fog, was me. I was standing there, wearing my ranger uniform. My face was turned toward the camera. And according to the timestamp, the photograph had been taken 8 minutes in the future.